Hey everybody, Eric Hayden here on YouTube. Another hot day here in eastern North Carolina. Got to wrap up a few things in the garden. Just did a heavy watering. We're going to go away for a couple days coming up here down the road, so I just want to make sure that the garden is in good shape as we head toward another week where we may or may not see some rain. I want to give you a nice garden tour to show you some of the blooms we have, because it can be disappointing sometimes when things don't go right. This is the third straight year we've had damage from a tropical system, so definitely a little disheartening, so it's good to focus on the good stuff. One quick thing I want to show you, I had some areas in the grass that were just not recovering even after the rain we had. And the lawn care guy that we have mentioned that the soil in some spots can be hygroscopic. And I don't know if you can see this, but I watered this, about 5 minutes ago, and you can see the water still sitting on the surface. And if you've seen my prior videos, we're talking about 100% sand, maybe a little bit of topsoil in the top, but that water is still sitting there, much like you would have like with the clay soil, something that can harden up during dry periods. So the point I'm making here is I watered the lawn by hand because, again, most of the lawn is quite green. We have irrigation, but I noticed this drier spot. And it took some time, but after repeated watering, eventually it started soaking in and broke that surface tension of the soil. So even with sandy soil, and again, I don't know how well it's showing up in the video, but this is 5 minutes later and I've got water on the surface. So if that happens, just keep watering to break that surface tension, and eventually it will soak in. That brings me to the garden itself, the rose garden. That's why it's always good to have a nice layer of mulch. That tends to keep that from happening as much. So we just did some watering since it's early in the day. I watered the leaves down. We'll just take a little tour. This is sunny Sundays. Some of these blooms are smaller right now because they're just in the opening stages. Compared to what we had with the hurricane, things are looking much, much better. These are some open blooms of Crescendo. A newer hybrid tea lasts 5 to 7 years and it has fragrance to it. You can see the foliage is similar to Gemini, as Gemini is one of the parents. So very, very nice bloom. Looks good as an open bloom, and it exhibits well for the local shows. Hot Princess, hard to show you these blooms without bending some down. This tends to do better in the spring for me. I tend to get quick open blooms and smaller buds in the hot part of the summer. But nonetheless, a good growing rose. This is about 8 feet tall now. Gemini, consistently one of the top exhibition roses. And again, you can tell that the blooms are smaller. That's what happens when it's 90 every day. So our next set of blooms in the fall, when we cool down, will have some more size to them. And this is why rose shows tend to be in the spring and the fall. No matter where you are, those cooler nights are better for the blooms. Zach Nobles, I've had some better blooms in the spring, but that's looking okay. And this is Jewel Grace. It looks like most of my blooms right now are open with our heat. Not a lot to show you back here. This is Marilyn Monroe, excuse me, Crystalline, Affirm, and then behind it, Let Freedom Ring. It's interesting on the sports. Every sport I've had, with the exception of Marilyn Monroe, it seems to grow about the same, but usually the original grows just a little taller. I'm curious if you get the same thing. Some open blooms on Let Freedom Ring. Beautiful red rose. Grows very, very tall. Good vase life. Not a lot of blooms to show you here. This is Signature, Sheila's Perfume, Eddie Edwards, Louise Estes. That was a maiden last year from Steve Singer. You can see that's doing well. And this 2 maidens this year, Cajun Moon and Maverick, just went into the ground not that long ago. We'll go over to our fragrance garden. Melania, Fred Wright Rose is not fragrant, but Fragrant Cloud is, and what a rose. It doesn't hold form very long, even quicker than Mr. Lincoln, but man, that smell is amazing. What I mean by that is if I cut this, it's got some firmness to it right now, but these petals fall off pretty quick. But just walking in the garden, I can smell this from a distance. Very, very nice. Here's Folklore, I mentioned before. This is a Cordis rose, starts to grow pretty tall in the fall. This is on its own roots, and it was actually rooted from its sport, which is European Touch. My father has that. I took a cutting, and then one of them reverted back. So I've got both Folklore and European Touch on its own roots. It's got beat up a little bit in the rain and some thrips, but that's a nice bloom. That's a secret. Also has some fragrance, and nothing on Pope John Paul II yet. Rounding up the fragrance garden, a little bit better grower so far than Fragrant Cloud has been Dolly Parton. You can see these blooms are past peak. There's the Mr. Lincoln. I'm going to have to mess around with that. You can tell it's gotten knocked over pretty good. In the back is Yolande De Aragon, and then this huge bush back here, it's rated in the 8.5, 8.6 for growing. You can see why. Alina. Only issue I have with it down south is I have a lot of thrips. I have cotton fields around me, a lot of farming. So any light colored bloom doesn't look as good as it did up north for me, just because of those pests. Huge wide bush here is Double Delight. Doesn't grow as tall as Mr. Lincoln, but it is a good growing rose. It's more a squatty rose. And this bloom is a little out of control, but you can see the coloring on it. It's quite nice. Similar coloring, but no fragrance, is Headliner. We'll round out the last two beds. This is Marilyn Monroe. The bloom's more apricot, been kind of bleached in the sun. This is Cajun Moon. Right here's a new planting of Ring of Fire. This is Silver Cream. This is a rose from John Smith, who has done Randy Scott and Sunny Sundays, probably two of the more popular roses of his. One that's really come into its own here over the last week or so, Mr. Caleb, again, Fred Wright rose, really nice red coloring to it. If you don't just bud it, it'll come in clusters. Looks nice as an open bloom, and it does have form. I'm trying to pick out one that looks a little bit better than some of these other ones, but very nice red rose, and for me, grows pretty well. You can see it's got some height to it, and again, a very nice red rose. Baby's Blush, that's John Smith, usually has form. Here's another Let Freedom Ring. I tend to double up on roses that do well for this area. Louise Estes is another one. No blooms on it now, and you can see got knocked down quite a bit. This is a maiden rose from Steve Singer last year. So just a year and a half it's been with me. And a lot of that time was in the pot last year, so it's looking quite good. New planting a moonstone to replace the virus moonstone I got in the mail. Another Crescendo, I like that one. Elise, this is on Roses in Review this year. Good growing rose, has a little bit better disease resistance for me than Randy Scott, one of other John's roses. And a real nice coloring to it. This doesn't show off its form as much as it has, but good growing rose for me. Nice orangish red blend. And then an older rose right here, Dublin. It looks gangly looking in terms of growth, but it's always putting out a big bloom. And again, these have been beaten up a little bit, but still nice coloring. We'll finish the tour with the rose that took the worst beating in the storm. This is Dublin Bay. I got to clean up this cane. This dead cane here is one that got ripped up, and most of this bush got torn up on the side facing the wind. But if we come around the back side where it was protected from the wind, you can see some clusters of roses already regenerating. So it's a very nice red rose, and it tends to have good disease resistance. I think it's a 8.3 on the Rose Guide from ARS. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, if you join the American Rose Society, not only do you get magazines throughout the year and some really good information, they put out a handbook of all the roses in commerce, and it gives you a review of them from people all across the country. And anything above an 8 is a pretty good growing rose. And once you get it up in the mid 8s, 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, that's an outstanding rose. And it usually, depends on the area you grow, but Louise Estes, Alina, Folklore, Veterans Honor, Gemini, all great growing roses that I have are rated in the 8.3s to 8.5s. Alina, if I didn't already mention that. So it's a good place to start. As a new rose grower, sometimes you may get discouraged and think roses are difficult to grow, when in reality, they can be a challenge, but starting with a variety that tends to do well is something that's going to get you ahead of the ball game. So, you know, for example, Signature is a great exhibition rose. It's not a great growing rose. It's kind of picky. You can see it's pretty small. Whereas if you start off with a Let Freedom Ring, like I mentioned, Veterans Honor, Gemini, that's another good one. Folklore, Alina, Mr. Lincoln, a good growing rose, you're gonna have more success and not get discouraged because you're starting with something good versus something challenging. That's it from the garden. Hope you enjoyed the tour. Things have been deadheaded and weeded and watered. Now I'm gonna do a little liquid fertilization and that'll set them up here for the next couple weeks quite nicely, barring any storms. Hopefully we get some rain, but we don't need any more hurricanes, that's for sure. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe and healthy, and I appreciate the subscribers. Take care.